Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. federal funding helping Beijing advance its military. A new report highlights a troubling phenomenon. The word China popping up twice in President Biden's address to the United Nations. More on the highlights of his speech. Is China's growing influence in the United Nations outcompeting Washington's? What are the consequences and where did the U.S. go wrong? An expert breaks it down.
China's influence in the UN probably outstrips our own, to be honest.
And former President Donald Trump vows to stop China from buying American farmland. How American farmers view the threat.
They purchased a lot of land here lately. But you know, the ironic part about it is you can't go to China and buy land.
Hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding, reportedly meant to shore up U.S. military, instead went toward advance Beijing's technology. That's the finding from a new congressional report released by Republicans on the House China Committee and Education Committee on Monday. The report listed several researchers as examples without giving out their names. It said one American researcher helped China achieve a breakthrough in developing its fourth-generation nuclear weapons, and that this was based on the expertise he developed from receiving DoD funding. The report noted this researcher continued to receive federal funding while doing sensitive research in China. Similar examples can be found in other fields: artificial intelligence, semiconductors, robotics, and advanced lasers, technology crucial to the battlefield. It noted that of the 9,000 research papers from researchers that took the U.S. government money, over 20% had co-authors with Chinese military ties. The report also said some U.S. know-how went to China through joint academic institutions between Chinese and American universities, citing examples of Georgia Tech and UC Berkeley. Both debated the report findings, and both of them have decided to drop their Chinese partnerships. Georgia Tech partnered with Tianjin University, a school blacklisted by Washington for stealing American technology. The two worked together to develop technology that could power autonomous weapons, but Georgia Tech decided to end the partnership. That's after Congress considered stripping Pentagon funding from universities that work with blacklisted entities. Congressman John Molinar, chair of the House China Committee, called the investigation alarming. He said Congress should pass new bills to protect American research. Democrats in the House Select China Committee did not support the report. In a statement to the New York Times, they said that while no one supported problematic research collaborations, cutting off all of them would not serve U.S. interests either. President Biden brought up China twice during his last speech as the president to the United Nations Tuesday. NTD's Jack Bradley has more on the story.
In his keynote address to the UN General Assembly on Tuesday in New York, President Joe Biden called for a stronger, more effective UN. He also called to expand the UN Security Council, the group's most powerful arm.
But maybe because all I've seen and all we have done together over the decades, I have hope. I know there is a way forward.
President Biden also mentioned how it's important not to escalate the conflict with the Chinese Communist Party, but also not being afraid to call out much of their aggressive behavior, from unfair market practices to stolen technology from the U.S.
The United States is unabashed, pushing back against unfair economic competition, against military coercion of other nations in the South China Sea, and maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, and protecting our most advanced technologies so they cannot be used against us or any of our partners.
Biden also discussed how the U.S. is working with China to stop the spread of fentanyl. Now, this comes amid a report from the House Select Committee on the CCP back in April, which found that the Chinese regime is directly subsidizing the manufacture and export of fentanyl into the U.S. Right after his speech, Biden hosted a summit with world leaders to address synthetic drug threats. It's a U.S.-led initiative to mobilize support among countries to stop the spread of fentanyl, much of which stems from China.
Nearly 60,000 pounds of fentanyl have been seized. That's enough to kill every single American. many times over.
Now, this all comes a day after President Biden proposed an executive order which would ban Chinese and Russian technology in U.S. vehicles due to safety concerns, as these cars can be remotely controlled. President Biden is set to meet with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in Washington on Thursday. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
First, let's zoom in on China's expanding presence in the United Nations. To break it down and take a closer look at security risks involved, Steve Lance with NTD's Capital Report was joined by Rick Switzer, tech strategy advisor and former senior political advisor at the U.S. Department of Defense.
China is not like any other country. Despite their occasional alignment with the United States, China often diverges with the free world and the United States on key issues, pursuing its own agenda. How much influence does China wield in the UN today, and how might this affect the future direction of that, really for many years respected organization?
Yeah, China's influence in the UN probably outstrips our own, to be honest. Their ability to engage with, what oftentimes are called the global South, their ability to sort of partner with folks who've had grievances for a while. And it's not just China. The authoritarian member states of the UN have worked together and to support each other in ways that, unfortunately, it doesn't seem that Western democracies have been able to do quite as well. That's why you find countries like Iran sometimes being on, the Human Rights Commission. And it's because, right, somewhat laughable, right?
I think North Korea was actually on that commission at one point.
The list goes on and on and on. And so, in that regard, the UN, the PRC has been able to use the UN for its own purposes and to gain control of institutions within the UN. And part of that is a function of how we have funded these organizations, but we haven't done the kind of things where we didn't really do a good job, and not just in the UN proper, but in all the UN adjacent organizations like the World Food Organization, right? Again, I mentioned the UCITO, right, and others, the other UN adjacent agencies, where they will put their officials in at an earlier stage, and they'll spend a career working in these UN organizations. And so when it comes time to pick a director general, for instance, of these, the Americans are always outsiders because we don't put our folks into the organizations long term. So we haven't done a good job of ensuring that we have sort of real long-term capacity of understanding how these organizations work and have folks who can move their way up in these organizations. So it's no wonder that when decisions are made within the actual bureaucracy of these organizations, they do far, far better than we do. Even though we fund the UN at far higher rates, their ability to sort of manipulate and weaponize the bureaucratic structure in ways that meet their ends, we need to address, in a more comprehensive, strategic fashion.
Rick Switzer, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
More on China and the United Nations. Communist China's influence has led to Taiwan's exclusion from all organizations related to the UN. But 9 of Taiwan's allies sent a request to the UN last week, asking the organization to accept Taiwan's meaningful participation in the United Nations systems. Most of those allies are developing countries in the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. None of the 9 are from Europe or North America. Taiwan is located about 100 miles off China's east coast and has a population of 23 million. Its allies argue these people should not be excluded from the UN. China is known to pressure other countries and international organizations not to recognize Taiwan as an independent country. The Chinese Communist Party sees Taiwan as its own, despite never having ruled the island. Taiwan left the UN as a permanent member of the Security Council in 1971. That's after the UN voted to accept that Communist Party-led China would take Taiwan's seat. At a roundtable in Pennsylvania Monday, former President Donald Trump told NTD that he will stop Communist China from buying U.S. farmland and causing disruptions. His comments come alongside concerns over China's espionage activities and influence on American agriculture. NTD White House correspondent Iris Tao has more from Western Pennsylvania.
At a roundtable here about protecting American agriculture from the Chinese Communist Party, former President Trump told NTD that China has been buying American farmlands at an unprecedented level and that it needs to be stopped.
Yes, ma'am. President Trump, how will you protect critical infrastructure in the U.S. and in states like Pennsylvania from the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, we're going to protect it by saying you can't come. You can't do it. We don't want you buying our land. We don't want you taking the land and basically taking it off the market. We don't want you doing it, and they're buying at levels that nobody's ever seen before. We don't want you buying it, but it's causing a lot of disruption, and that's what they want to do.
Speaking at a family farm in rural Pennsylvania, Trump also vowed to make China honor a deal to buy tens of billions of dollars of American farm goods and ramp up tariffs on Chinese goods.
Then the customer came back to us and said that even though our cost structure was in line with the domestic producer, we couldn't come close to the prices that they were getting from China, and so they would continue to purchase offshore.
That's why you need tariffs.
Some farmers also expressing their concerns and telling NTD that they want China out of their business.
China is just being very aggressive and wanting to buy up all our resources and take care of our food, and we'll just be dependent on someone else, which is just suicide in my mind.
It's a huge threat because without us and others like us across the United States, we're in trouble.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign has been criticizing Trump, saying his tariff policies would, quote, devastate U.S. farmers. Her campaign also appealing to working-class Americans ahead of her visit to Pittsburgh this Wednesday.
She's talking about creating more small businesses and financial incentives. The choice on the economy is going to be crystal clear, and you're going to see that this week when she speaks in Pennsylvania about her own vision for the economy.
In another development, Trump said in a weekend interview that if he loses this time, he will not run again in 2028.
If you're not successful this time, do you see yourself running again in 4 years?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think that will be it. I don't see that at all. I think hopefully we're going to be successful.
Reporting from Smithton, Pennsylvania, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Former President Trump said he'll stop China from buying U.S. farmland and causing disruptions. Steve Lance with NTD's Capital Report spoke to John Boyd, founder of the National Black Farmer Association, to assess the threat China poses to American farmland.
Well, China is the biggest threat to U.S. infrastructure. This is a security threat. This is a food security threat. They're purchasing land next to military bases. They're purchasing land next to former college institutions. They're purchasing those. And they purchased a lot of land here lately. But you know, the ironic part about it is you can't go to China and buy land. They're buying U.S. companies, Smithfield Foods. So China has quietly come in and snuck into the United States and really got a foothold on America's food base in this country. They're stealing seed technology in this country. And we really need Congress to put some laws in place to stop China from purchasing U.S. farmland in this country. I think it's something that needs to happen.
John, I just want to briefly follow up on a point that you made when it comes to seed technology. A lot of people might not realize, I didn't for a while, that there's a certain amount of proprietary intellectual property, if you will, that goes into our seeds, and China is stealing that. Tell us how our seed technology gives us an edge over China and why this is a threat.
Well, seed technology gives the farmer an edge as far as our production. Crop production per acre, how many yields, and drought resistance. These are all things that farmers pay for when we pay for a bag of seeds. A bag of soybean seeds is between $60 and $70 with all of the technology in it. That technology gives us a cutting edge. And China is coming in and stealing that technology and taking it back to a country that really, we can't go in their country and do any of these things. And I want to keep emphasizing that. We can't go to China and buy an acre of land. We can't go to China and buy a farm. As a matter of fact, if I visit China, I have to have a special visa to visit and bring farmers that even look at how they're growing things. And they're in the United States forming these dummy companies and purchasing farmland at auction. So I've been to the auction and I know that this is happening firsthand because I've experienced it right here in my county.
Fourth-generation farmer from Boydton, Virginia, John Boyd, thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you for staying on top of this very, very important story, and thank you for supporting America's farmers.
Coming up, an alert from the Office of U.S. Spy Chief. China, Russia, and Iran are stepping up influence operations targeting American voters using AI. Ukraine shining a spotlight on Chinese aid to Russia. A high-level official details evidence found in Russian weapons left behind on the Ukrainian battlefield. And the owner of clothing brands Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger taking aim at China. That's over its no business with forced labor in Xinjiang policy. Beijing just launched a probe into whether the policy violated China's laws. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Countries like China are turning to artificial intelligence as the work to influence how Americans vote. That's according to a new intelligence report from the U.S. Spy Chief's office. Let's dive in.
The intelligence reports that China, Iran, and Russia are ramping up influence operations to shape public opinion in the U.S. by using AI tools. Previous intelligence warned that foreign actors seek to amplify divisive social issues to make Washington look weak. The report said China's activities are more general, mostly focusing on shaping the global view of China. Chinese actors have also used AI-generated content to amplify divisive issues in the U.S. That's including politics, while Russia and Iran created more content targeting American voters.
Chinese entities have also circulated videos made with fake news anchors and social media profiles. They largely target U.S. domestic issues like drug use, immigration, and abortion without explicitly backing any political candidates. Ukraine says most of the foreign parts found in Russian weapon debris came from China. Despite Western sanctions, Moscow has been able to replenish its military machine through the duration of the war in Ukraine. Here's more.
Ukrainian presidential advisor says China is supplying Russia as well as being a transit route for Western products. He says important parts used in surveillance drones and missiles have also originated in the U.S. and Europe. Ukraine allegedly found a range of advanced chips made by U.S. companies, such as Texas Instruments, among others. The advisor added that it's not always possible to say whether these chips were actually designed for missiles or for other goods.
China is taking action against American corporate group PVH, the parent of fashion brands Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. Beijing launched an investigation Tuesday to see whether the company has taken so-called discriminatory measures against cotton fabric coming from the Xinjiang region. PVH stopped doing businesses within the region after governments and human rights organizations accused Beijing of forced labor abuses there. Here are the details.
China's Commerce Ministry threatened to add American group PVH to its blacklist, which would ban the company from trading with China. It would also prevent Chinese investment from being funneled into the company and block individuals associated with the company from entering China. PVH began suspending business with companies in Xinjiang 4 years ago due to concerns that it could be unknowingly participate in China's forced labor abuses there. Xinjiang is located in the northwest of China, where most of the country's Uyghur minority resides. Uyghurs living overseas have been raising awareness about China's suppression of the group for years, including forced labor. Since then, the U.S., along with many other Western governments, have issued rules restricting imports from Xinjiang. Human rights organizations and activists have called on the fashion industry to comply with universal principles and to avoid aiding Beijing in its suppression. But rejecting Xinjiang cotton could mean retaliation in the massive China market. Fashion brands like H&M, Nike, and others faced boycotts in China after they released statements condemning human rights violations in Xinjiang. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Staying with trade, a rejection from India. The country's commerce minister said New Delhi will not join a free trade deal with China. The trade deal, called RCEP, is the world's largest free trade agreement. Members include 15 countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Among them, China, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Altogether, they make up about 30% of global GDP. India said joining a free trade deal with China is not in its national interest, saying China's economy isn't transparent and that the way Beijing manages China's trade, politics, and economy is completely different from what the democratic world wants. India added that it's looking to become a semiconductor manufacturing hub like Taiwan. Solitary confinement, total isolation, 6 to 9 hours of daily interrogation. A former Canadian diplomat recounts the psychological torture he experienced in a Chinese cell. Here's his story.
That former diplomat is Michael Korvig. Beijing arrested him and another Canadian, Michael Spavor, after Canada arrested Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou at the request of Washington. After more than 1,000 days of detention, they were both released. On the same day, the Justice Department dropped charges against Meng Wanzhou. Korvig went from a think tank advisor to a prisoner in China. Speaking to the media yesterday, Korvig said the time spent in a Chinese cell still gives him a lot of pain. He said he missed his daughter's birth and there was no daylight in the solitary cell, but the fluorescent lights were on 24 hours a day. Korvig said it's the most grueling thing he's ever been through. He added that Chinese guards tried to torment and terrorize and coerce him.
Just last week, a man in Hong Kong was sentenced to 14 months in jail for wearing a T-shirt with a protest slogan on it. Experts and activists say freedom in Hong Kong is being eroded ever since Beijing imposed a broad national security law on the city in 2020. Many Hong Kongers have been forced to leave their homes to get away from the harsh conditions. Around 180,000 Hong Kongers have fled to the UK over the last 3 years. At the first Labour Party conference since the new UK government came to power, Hong Kongers, politicians and campaigners launched a new group called Labour Friends of Hong Kong. A co-chair of the group, Parliament member Neil Coyle, told NTD some Hong Kongers building new lives in the UK still face harassment from the Chinese regime.
People have come to flee persecution and still find they're open to harassment by the Chinese Communist Party on British shores. This shouldn't be happening. It's unacceptable, and the Chinese government needs to have that made very clear to them as soon as possible by the new government here.
Coyle said some are targeted for their support of freedoms in Hong Kong. Their meetings are disrupted. They have also faced interference with their finances or had their personal information hacked. In 2020, a group of men dragged a Hong Kong pro-democracy protester into Manchester's Chinese consulate in the UK and beat him.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.